Hi, I'm Bob Fitzgerald, Senior Vice President of Finario. We are headquartered in Darien, Connecticut, and we have users around the world using our software to strategically allocate and manage capital. We're joined today by Tom Scalera. Hi, Tom.
Hey,
Thanks
Bob.
for joining us.
Absolutely.
Tom is the current CEO of the Delticus Group, a portfolio company of Warburg Pincus.
Correct.
And the former CFO of ITT for over a decade.
Correct.
Wanted to get a little bit of your background before we jump right in.
In 2010, 2011, we spun off our defense company. We spun off our water company. And then I was named the CFO of ITT's industrial businesses, which was still a combination of many different pieces that had been acquired over the years. Very different industries, very different returns on invested capital, different business models, and all those different dynamics. But that was really where things got interesting, where I became a CFO for a company that was about 1.2, 1.3 billion market cap at the time. And we'll talk about what happened, but when I left, we were at 8.6 billion. So we had a very fascinating journey from spin to kind of modern day ITT.
What was a typical day like when you were balancing strategy versus tactical decisions?
Our businesses had not been invested in. They were not core businesses prior to the spin-offs. So the first priority was organic growth and reinvesting and recapitalizing these businesses that were tremendous brands, 100-year history plus in many cases, but they were not core to the old ITT. So allocation of capital, we were a lower priority. There were other parts of this massive portfolio within ITT that received more capital attention, more focus. We're more in the focus of our shareholders. So we really needed to recapitalize these businesses. So organic growth was job one for the most of my time at ITT. How do we recapitalize these businesses, really refocus on our customers, drive efficiency in our operations? We're in automotive and aerospace, energy. We're in very difficult markets, and our customers expect us to be there for them for decades. So really showing that we have the product lines, the support, the capabilities to partner with them was critical. So that's what we really focused on. And we had to prove to investors and to stakeholders that we knew how to deploy capital. And a lot of people and investors didn't think that we were going to be able to do it effectively. And the way that we earned that credibility was really through CapEx investment, efficient CapEx investment, and great returns on those investments that we could then show to our shareholders and said, okay, you know what, keep doing it.
When you were able to buy a little time from the analysts and the investors, were you and your FP&A leader very hands-on? Would you go visit the various businesses?
For sure. And I think that evolved more and more over time with ITT, which was getting out to the operations. We're a global company. And really sitting, walking the factory floor, right, with investors, shareholders, the board, as a leadership team. You have to see the equipment. You have to see the operator's passion about the equipment, right? You could have a great system and get all the data in the world, but sometimes you have to see that the operators that are running that equipment understand the customer, understand the equipment, are passionate about the growth in the future.
We hear from a number of industry experts that the three most important functions of the CFO are paying dividends, paying down debt, and then the effective allocation of organic capital.
Right. So many things are coming at you from so many different angles. You always have to constantly remind yourself what truly matters. Where is value being created? As a CFO, there's only so much time you are afforded in that seat. Right? The average life expectancy of a CFO is not getting longer. So the most important decisions that have to be made are capital allocation, right? So when you go back to what are the three things, to me, there aren't really three equally balanced capital allocation choices. It starts with number one. The number one responsibility of a CFO is to allocate capital. If you don't do that right, the investors, the board, your stakeholders, everyone else on the management team will not let you allocate capital into any other strategic categories or other returns to investors. But once you figure that out, then you have to get the tools to make yourself and your team highly effective in that area. Because if you're efficient and effective in your primary role and responsibility and your primary deliverable, everything else is going to be easier. You could implement a tool like Finario and have the benefits readily available of a consistent manner, consistent metrics, consistent calculations. And you go to your stakeholders and say, one of my top priorities as a CFO is allocating capital. No investor, no stakeholder in the world will say, well, why would you do that? Like everyone will say, absolutely, you have the right priority. And to support that, I have invested in the tools and the techniques and the training to do that well across the organization, like Finario can bring. So to me, I think once you get organic capital deployed effectively and you build that credibility with the board, with the management team, with your other stakeholders, then you have access to make other capital allocation decisions around strategic investments, M&A, returns to shareholders through dividends and repurchases.
At ITT, did the projects come from the shop floor? Was it the line of business owners? Was it the finance teams from the various organizations? How did that whole process evolve?
Effective capital management generally has to come from the shop floor and the business leaders that know their customers and know where to take the business. On occasion, sure, it comes from headquarter initiatives or segment initiatives, but you have to be on the shop floor and really understand where value is created, how equipment and machinery works, what your customers need. So then that's, I think, the ideal way to come up with a capital plan, first bottoms up to start with. But to do that, you have to have the distributed abilities all across the organization with a great tool like Finario to be able to kind of load in on a consistent basis at all of those points the required information in a consistent manner and get the metrics and the calculations done, with the proper framework across the board.
There's also areas where there are situations where you're going to spend a significant amount of money, say it's at the plant level, but you're not sure where it's going to be spent. Finario gives you that ability to say, we're going to put money into what we call a budget pool, and then that those funds will be allocated at the child level, if you will.
Yep.
But then there's accountability for
That's
how
right.
that's.
Obviously, you're looking at projects as they come up, but then you need to step back. Say, how big is the maintenance budget? How big is the growth budget? How much organic revenue are we really driving with all of these? And we put it back together. What's the ROIC on this year's capital budget? You can't do that in Excel quickly. But
right.
with a tool like Finario, you have visibility to all of that real time with drill down functionality and visibility as projects come in. You have not only the drill down of the current performance, but you can also see some of the history of those expenditures. You have no history in the Excel universe, right? You're just flying blind and flying real time. And having additional tools that I know Finario has that allow, kind of budget owners, if you will, to add a risk metric and a risk variable, and is huge, because that is a piece of the puzzle that has never really been fully implemented into Capex decision making. Is how do you quantify the risk that you've baked in to the decision that you're proposing, in a bottoms up budget process? What is your risk assessment? And that's really, I think that's a game changer piece of the puzzle. Everyone expects finance to get it right. That's just the nature of being a CFO, hence the relatively short lifespan of the CFO. You're expected to know the unknowable. But the reality is you're expected to have a framework to analyze and assess the future in a logical way, where you're putting the right variables in, you have a consistent calculation, you're putting the risk in, you're measuring the reward, and you can explain it and justify it, and then whatever happens will happen. But if you don't have that consistent framework and things go in a very, very different direction than anyone anticipated, it's very hard to defend your choice, your decision making.
How important was capital allocation at ITT when you first entered the role?
To me, where you feel the impact of that as a finance leader is you have this great decision or great capital idea, and everyone gets behind it, you invest in it. And then you just wait for the returns. Like, this is going to be fantastic. We have a great idea. And then all of a sudden, everything starts to happen. And then all of a sudden, it's a year since you expected to be up and running. It's like, why didn't somebody identify all these possibilities? You're never going to get them all right. But did somebody go through and start to really assess these possibilities and explain, hey, we thought it would be 6 months, but it ended up being a year. Okay, well, we need to understand that. Where that becomes more evident in some cases is this look back, right? So, hey, you asked for capital last year that you haven't spent yet, or isn't producing any returns yet. So what went wrong? Because I know now, using a tool like Finario, what happened, what worked, what didn't work. We have to have that conversation. Something isn't working in the process. You're not seeing some parts of the supply chain right. You're not getting your resources lined up to get to the starting line, let alone to the ultimate, financial return metrics. So I think having a look back capability that's structured and integrated into the tool allows you to really see where some of these variables are missing in submissions from the past, and you can correct them going forward, and maybe correct the ones that are still sitting idle.
Whether it's a hurricane or a supply chain, whatever it is, if you were managing capital in Excel, let's say a project date slips a month, what would happen? You'd have to redo everything and re-enter everything. The risk of error goes through the roof.
Sure.
In Finario, you just click one field,
Right.
and all of the other data is preserved. The time of the project, the financials, return metrics are all preserved.
Right.
Spans fiscal periods, quarterly periods, no impact. So it's incredibly powerful.
We always used to think that the Capex system was really just about racking and stacking. You rack them all together and then you stack them in priority order. I think when you get into Finario's solution, not only can you do all of that very efficiently in a very structured framework, but then you can look back through history. You can move that data, analyze it different ways. You can create metrics that are unique, or you can use the structured metrics that are part of Finario's framework.
There's almost a misnomer about Capex. It's in some systems, it's just a depreciation calculator.
Right.
And it really doesn't have the approval. It doesn't have the project financials. It doesn't have the decision support that we bring to bear.
And I think sometimes finance leaders, candidly, I think we sometimes focus on other departmental needs or other functional needs, and maybe we don't invest in some of the core technologies and capabilities and solutions to drive some of the things that really matter, right? So if your primary responsibility as a CFO is to drive organic growth, then the first tool you should invest in is one that enables you to do that effectively, consistently, and quickly. Because you need to evidence to shareholders and to your board and to your stakeholders that you know how to deploy capital. You want to be able to go into your boardroom, sit down with investors, shareholders, stakeholders, and be able to show those capital decisions and drill down. And there's not a question I can't answer because I have visibility to the entire process at my fingertips.
Right.
My advice is one of the first things a new CFO should do is look at the tools that will make them successful. And a tool like Finario, where you're allocating capital, will make CFOs more successful. It will. And that will make the organization more successful. So it's not a decision that should be delayed, because you'll get busy with other things, other priorities, and it may, get pushed to the side when it shouldn't be.
If you had a crystal ball, given everything that's going on in the world these days, crazy geopolitical and pandemics and wars and what have
Sure.
you, we're hearing quite a bit about automating the office of the CFO, whether through machine learning or robotics or AI. How do you think automation will help the office of the CFO, and what will that role become if you had to guess?
I think if you talk to other parts of organizations about finance, their number one complaint is we're too busy doing those kinds of things.
Right.
Non-value add things. They have to get done, but they're non-value add. So as a finance executive resource, employee, you're torn between, I would rather be doing other stuff, but I have to do this. One of the biggest challenges of finance is people, right? There just aren't enough talented finance resources, particularly in areas like FP&A. So if you give them good tools to do their core job, and again, capital allocation, capital deployment, capital investment decision making, to me is still job one in finance. Give the team the best tools to do that efficiently so that they do that very well. Then they can free up time to do other things that can help grow the business strategically, to help the function operate more efficiently, to take on additional responsibilities, or to have a better work-life balance. Uncertainty has expanded in ways that we hadn't seen for many, many years. Between inflation, supply chain, all of these other geopolitical dynamics, ESG, right? There are just a number of other variables that have to be contemplated. And you need to have a good structured way to make sure that you're thinking through all of those and making the right decision as a result of putting the right inputs in.
So one of the capabilities that we have in Finario is the ability to show the ESG impact. And not only in approving projects, going through an ESG officer or another qualified executive who has a responsibility, but also the type of the ESG that you have to comply with, whether it's water preservation or carbon footprint or what have you. How important would that have been?
It's critically important to every organization. The reality is to connect it to the tangible. Right, the piece of equipment that you are buying today or asking to buy, what impact will it have on energy consumption? What impact will it have on carbon footprint? What impact will it have on water consumption? And having those owners and operators of that equipment be accountable to think through that at point of decision. Are you thinking this through? Are you getting the maximum ESG impact, which is also going to drive financial impacts? And so really having ESG as a part of a capital allocation today is absolutely, it's table stakes already, right? It's not just critical or nice to have. It's essential. So a tool that allows you to do that seamlessly and integrated, I think is fantastic and one that all organizations need to seriously consider having implemented.
Well, Tom, I'd like to thank you so much. Very, very insightful, terrific advice, perspective. Really appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Absolutely, Bob. Glad to be here.